I was plating the signature dish for a VP table, a delicate dance of seared scallops and saffron risotto, when my phone, tucked into my apron, buzzed with a venom I'd never felt before. It was a text from Sarah, my wife of 15 years. "Leo, I'm at the airport with Damien. He understands passion. I've filed for divorce online and taken my half of everything. Don't try to find us. My half." That implied our joint business accounts, the restaurant's operating funds, everything. My hand, usually rock steady, trembled, smearing a streak of beurre blanc across the pristine white plate. The clatter of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, the rhythmic chop-chop, all faded into a deafening roar in my ears. 15 years, my life's work, my heart gone, announced in a cold, digital kiss-off while I was in the heat of service. I felt the blood drain from my face, replaced by a sickening wave of nausea. My sous chef, noticing my stillness, asked, "Chef, you okay?" I took a deep breath, the air thick with the aroma of roasting duck and betrayal. "Fine, Carlos. Just a supplier issue." I somehow finished plating, sent the dish out with a forced smile, then walked calmly to my small office at the back, my legs feeling like lead. Inside, I sank into my chair, the buzz of the restaurant a distant hum. I pulled out my phone. The message was still there, stark and brutal. My half. The immediate damage could be catastrophic. I checked our main business account app, balance E78P32. Yesterday, it held over $150 in payroll, supplier payments, everything. My breath hitched. She hadn't just taken her half of personal savings, she'd gutted the business. Pure, unadulterated rage, cold and sharp, pierced through the initial shock. For the next 24 hours, I was a ghost. I auto-piloted through the rest of the dinner service, my mind a maelstrom. I sent the staff home, locked up, and drove back to an empty house. The silence was a physical weight. Her side of the closet was bare. Her perfume, once a comforting scent, now a mocking reminder. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying her message, the casual cruelty of it. By dawn, the shock had solidified into a hard, cold resolve. This wasn't just a divorce, this was a calculated strike. And I would find out why, and I would fight back. The truth is, there were signs, subtle shifts I'd dismissed as stress or midlife restlessness. For the last 6 months, Sarah had become distant. She, who once co-managed the front of house, with infectious enthusiasm, had grown critical of the long hours, the all-consuming nature of the restaurant we built together. "There has to be more to life than P&L statements and inventory checks, Leo," she'd say. That was the first sign. Then came the new friends from her yoga retreats, names I never quite caught, faces I never saw. She started taking weekend trips, solo mindfulness journeys, she called them. That was the second. The third, and perhaps most telling, was her sudden obsession with her personal finances, always asking vague questions about asset division. If anything ever happened, I'd brushed it off. Fool. I hadn't been entirely naive, though. A chef learns to anticipate, to have a solid mise en place, not just for ingredients, but for life. About 3 months ago, sensing a growing chill, I'd quietly moved our original restaurant incorporation documents and my personal inheritance papers into a secured deposit box. I also started a separate, small savings account, diverting a fraction of my personal consultation fees there. A contingency fund she wouldn't know about. It wasn't much, but it wouldn't be zero. Her betrayal stung, but her calculated sabotage of the business, our shared dream, that was a declaration of war. We met at a chaotic food festival. I was a sous chef then, ambitious, running a pop-up stall. She was a charming marketing intern for the event, navigating the throngs with a bright smile. She loved my passion, my food. I loved her energy, her belief in me. We talked for hours that day amidst the noise and steam, about flavors, dreams, and a little restaurant we'd one day own. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony, followed by a feast I cooked myself. The early years were a whirlwind of hard work and shared purpose. Leo's Table, opened 2 years into our marriage, a tiny 30-seat bistro funded by my meager savings and her small inheritance. She handled the front, charming guests, managing staff, while I commanded the kitchen. Those were the golden days, collapsing into bed exhausted but exhilarated, our hands clasped, whispering about positive reviews and future expansion. Our first Michelin star, I remember her scream of joy, tears streaming down her face as she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. That was our peak, our shared Everest. Our backgrounds were different. I came from a line of working-class Italian immigrants. Food was love, work was life. My parents ran a small deli, and I learned the value of fresh ingredients and hard graft from the age of 10. Sarah's family was more white-collar. Her father a successful architect, her mother a university lecturer. They appreciated fine dining but didn't quite understand the relentless grind of owning a restaurant. "When are you going to get a real break, Leo?" her mother would ask, oblivious to the fact that the restaurant was my life, not just a job. We bought our first apartment with a loan signed by her father, a point she'd occasionally, subtly, remind me of during arguments. The restaurant was our main asset, built on my culinary skill and her initial business acumen, but legally we were equal partners in the holding company. Life threw curveballs, a devastating kitchen fire 3 years in, a glowing review in the New York Times that catapulted us to fame, the stress of maintaining standards, the constant pressure. Each event either pulled us closer or subtly frayed the edges of our connection. My professional life was one of precise execution and managing complex systems, from supply chains to staff dynamics. I often used kitchen analogies for life, which she used to find endearing, then later irritating. The distance grew insidiously. It started with her wanting separate vacations. I need to breathe, Leo, away from the smell of garlic and reductions. That was the first noticeable crack. Then, she stepped back from daily operations at Leo's table, saying she wanted to find her own passion, eventually opening a small upscale boutique. Fair enough, I thought, though I missed her presence, her insights. But our dinner conversations dwindled from shared dreams to her complaints about suppliers for her shop, or my long hours. The shared language of our life was eroding. The definitive turning point came about a year ago. We were discussing a major renovation for the restaurant. I was excited, full of ideas. She just sighed. Is this all there is, Leo? Another project, more debt, more time away from living. She mentioned Damien, the new wine supplier for her boutique, a few times. So charismatic. Really understands the European market. I didn't think much of it. He was just another name in her new, separate world. The intimacy had faded, replaced by a polite cohabitation. I realized now I was too engrossed in keeping the ship afloat, too focused on the next service, the next glowing review, to see the iceberg dead ahead. The day after her text, with the restaurant temporarily closed due to unforeseen circumstances. A massive understatement. I started digging. I needed to understand the extent of the financial damage. I accessed our online banking portal, not just the main business account she'd emptied, but all of them. She hadn't just taken liquid cash. She'd maxed out business credit lines, taken advances, a systematic gutting. The statements showed a flurry of transfers over the past 2 weeks, culminating in a massive wire transfer to an offshore account the day she left. The name on that offshore account wasn't hers alone. It was a joint account with Damien Cross. This wasn't a spur of the moment escape. This was premeditated. One transaction caught my eye, a $20,000 payment to DCV Holdings LLC 2 months prior, marked consulting fee. I'd never authorized it, never even heard of DCV Holdings. My office, usually a sanctuary of order, felt like a war room. Spreadsheets, bank statements, loan documents littered my desk. My training as a chef, the meticulous planning, the ability to deconstruct a complex dish into its core components kicked in. This was a disaster, but disasters could be managed, broken down, and addressed. The sheer scale of her betrayal, the calculated cruelty, was breathtaking. This Damien wasn't just a lover, he was a collaborator. I called Marco Silva, an old friend and a fellow chef who ran a successful place across town. We met at his restaurant before his morning prep. He listened patiently, his face grim, as I laid out the bare facts over strong espresso. Dio mio Leo, he finally said, shaking his head. This is a hit job, not a divorce. He wasn't one for platitudes. This Damien, the wine guy, you know him? Vaguely. Supplies her boutique. Not me. Marco tapped his fingers on the table. She can't just liquidate business assets like that, especially if you're partners. You need a lawyer, Leo, a shark. Not just any family lawyer. Someone who understands business, fraud. He gave me a name, Isabella Rossi. Izzy. She's tough, smart. Handled a nasty case for another restaurateur I know, got him everything. His practical, no-nonsense advice cut through my fog of anger and despair. I needed a strategy, not just emotion. Marco's support, his calm assessment from a fellow professional, was invaluable. In our world, trust is everything, with suppliers, with staff, with partners. Sarah had torched it all. That night, I remembered the security cameras I'd installed in the restaurant after a minor break in last year, not just covering the dining room and kitchen, but also my office. They recorded to a cloud server. Sarah probably forgot or never cared. With a knot in my stomach, I logged in. I fast-forwarded through weeks of footage, looking for anything around the date of that DCV Holdings payment, and there it was. Sarah in my office, alone after hours. She was on the phone, hushed tones, then she accessed my computer. I zoomed in. She was navigating the online banking portal, initiating a transfer. Then, a few days later, Damien Cross himself, bold as brass, in my office with Sarah. They were laughing, looking at something on her laptop, plans, spreadsheets. He kissed her. A long, possessive kiss. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair that led to financial ruin. This was a coordinated heist, planned and executed from within my own sanctuary. The visual confirmation, the casual intimacy of their betrayal in my personal space, was a punch to the gut far harder than the text message. I saved the footage, multiple copies. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was about systematic fraud. The shockwave from seeing that footage morphed into a chilling clarity. The grief was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a steely determination. This wasn't just Sarah leaving me, this was a deliberate, malicious attempt to destroy everything I'd built, possibly with this Damien orchestrating it. My mind, accustomed to breaking down complex recipes and kitchen logistics, started formulating a plan. Item 1, document everything. Item 2, secure legal counsel Izzy Rossi. Item 3, protect what little was left. Item 4, uncover the full extent of their scheme. My chef's brain, the part that thrived on order and precision, took over. The emotional storm was still raging, but the captain was back at the helm, navigating by a new, grim set of stars. The next morning, I called Isabella as Izzy Rossi. Her voice was crisp, no nonsense. I briefly explained the situation, the emptied accounts, the suspicious transfers, the business at stake. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, "I have a cancellation this afternoon, 2 p.m. Bring everything you have, and I mean everything." I spent the morning gathering every document, bank statements, incorporation papers, supplier contracts, the security footage, even old emails where Sarah had discussed business finances. I felt a flicker of my old self, the meticulous planner, the chef preparing his station before a chaotic service. This was my new mise en place for a different kind of battle. Izzy Rossi's office was sleek, modern, overlooking the city. She was younger than I expected, sharp eyes, an air of focused intensity. She listened without interruption as I laid out the story, occasionally nodding, her pen flying across a legal pad. When I played the security footage of Sarah and Damien in my office, her expression hardened. "Okay, Leo," she said, leaning back. "This isn't just a messy divorce. This is potential conspiracy to defraud, embezzlement. The offshore account with this Damien Cross is a major red flag." She explained the legal ramifications, the complexities of tracing assets, the fight ahead. "She didn't just take our half, she's jeopardized the entire business, your livelihood, your staff's jobs. The 150,000 from the operating account, the max credit lines, that's severe." Her directness was oddly comforting. No sugarcoating, just the unvarnished truth. "Our first step," she continued, "is an emergency court order to freeze any known assets of hers and this Damien, and to get full discovery on DCV Holdings LLC and that offshore account. We need to move fast." For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of hope. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had a professional by my side, someone who understood the rules of this new, ugly game. Izzy and her team worked like a well-oiled kitchen brigade. Within days, they'd uncovered more. DCV Holdings LLC, Izzy explained, showing me the paperwork, is a shell corporation, registered to a P.O. box, sole director Damien Cross. That $20,000 consulting fee was likely seed money for their escape plan, or to cover initial legal fees for the divorce he knew she was planning. Then came the bank's initial response to our subpoena for the offshore account. "It's a Kitts and Nevis account," Izzy said, her brow furrowed. "They're notoriously difficult, but not impossible. What's interesting are the other transactions into that account around the same time Sarah's money landed." She showed me a list of wire transfers from other, seemingly unrelated entities, all within a few weeks. This Damien Cross might be a professional. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a passion-fueled betrayal. Sarah had potentially stumbled into, or been lured into, a much larger, more predatory operation. The affair was the grace, but the engine was pure financial predation. The investigation deepened. Izzy suspected Damien wasn't just an opportunistic lover, but possibly a serial operator who targeted vulnerable individuals with assets. The pattern of fund extraction, the shell corporation. The offshore account, it's sophisticated, she said. He likely identified Sarah as a mark, a successful business co-owner, perhaps showing signs of dissatisfaction in her marriage. She suggested we look into Damien's background more thoroughly, hiring a discreet private investigator. The PI's initial report a week later was chilling. Damien Cross had a history. 2 similar cases in other states, women in partnerships or off marriages who suddenly liquidated assets, transferred them to offshore accounts linked to him, and then disappeared or were left high and dry when he vanished. Neither case had resulted in conviction due to lack of direct proof or the women being unwilling to testify, perhaps out of shame or fear. This was his MO, mise en place, of deception. My anger simmered, but it was a focused heat now, like a perfectly controlled gas flame. Sarah might have been a willing participant or a gullible fool, but either way, Damien was the architect of this ruin. With the mounting evidence of a pattern of fraudulent activity, Izzy filed for an emergency injunction to freeze Sarah and Damien's known assets, including petitioning the international courts regarding the offshore account, citing suspected financial crime. We provided the security footage, the PI's report, and the financial analysis to the commercial crimes unit of the local police, who, prompted by Izzy's connections, started taking an interest. The initial response from the court was swift: a temporary freeze on any U.S.-based accounts they could identify linked to Sarah or Damien. A small victory, but the bulk of the money was still offshore. The police assigned a detective to the case, Detective Miller. He was methodical, impressed by the meticulous records I'd kept for the restaurant and Izzy's organized presentation of the evidence. He confirmed that Damien Cross was now on their radar for broader fraudulent activities. A month into this nightmare, I got a ping. An alert from an old, forgotten app Sarah had once installed on our phones. A location-sharing app for emergencies. She must have forgotten to disable it on her old device she'd left behind in her haste. It showed a single steady dot, a luxury resort in Bali. Damien was careless or arrogant, or both. Izzy was initially hesitant. Confronting them directly is risky. Leo could compromise the investigation. I'm not confronting them, I said. But knowing where they are might help Detective Miller liaise with international authorities. And, I paused, it gives us a target. We relayed the information to Miller. He was cautious but acknowledged it was a significant lead. Simultaneously, Izzy had an idea. Damien has a taste for the good life, right? Fine wine luxury. He probably has suppliers, contacts. If he's done this before, he might have assets hidden under other names, or through associates. The PI started digging into Damien's known associates from the previous cases, looking for patterns in investments or property. It was slow, painstaking work. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep the restaurant alive, running on fumes and personal loans from Marco in a massively downsized operation. The staff, loyal and incredible, took pay cuts, worked double shifts. Their belief in me, in Leo's table, was a lifeline. Then, a breakthrough. The PI found a connection. One of Damien's former associates, a disbarred lawyer named Finch, was recently seen making inquiries about high-end art auctions in New York. Finch was also linked to one of Damien's previously suspected shell corporations. Art is a common way to launder money or hide assets, Izzy explained. It's portable, high value. She cross-referenced auction house schedules with Damien's known preferences from his social media profile which he'd foolishly left public. There was a major auction in New York in 2 weeks. It's a long shot, Izzy said, but if Damien is trying to move or legitimize some of that money, and if he's as arrogant as he seems, he might use a proxy or even attend himself, thinking he's untouchable. Detective Miller, working with federal authorities due to the potential interstate and international fraud, got a discreet surveillance warrant for the auction, focusing on Finch and any unidentified high bidders potentially linked to Damien. They also put an alert on Damien's passport, should he try to re-enter the U.S. We decided I would go to New York, not to interfere, but to identify Damien if he showed up, as I was the one who'd seen him clearly in my office. The auction house was a world away from my bustling kitchen. Gilt, edged catalogs, hushed voices, the clinking of champagne flutes. I sat in the back, feeling out of place, scanning faces. Hours passed. Then, I saw him, not Damien, but Finch, the disbarred lawyer, sitting with a woman I didn't recognize. They successfully bid on a mid-tier contemporary painting. As they were arranging payment and collection, plainclothes officers, coordinated by Miller's federal contacts, quietly approached them. Finch, it turned out, was indeed acting as a proxy. And the funds, traceable back to a secondary offshore account, which, through meticulous financial forensics triggered by our initial St. Kitts inquiry, was found to be linked to Damien Cross and, surprisingly, contained deposits that matched withdrawals from accounts of other victims. Damien, it seemed, was even dumber than arrogant. He'd been using Finch to try and legitimize stolen funds from multiple victims. And Sarah, the woman with Finch, was not her. Sarah was still in Bali, according to the location app, seemingly oblivious. The investigators, armed with the auction house transaction and Finch's panicked cooperation, he flipped almost immediately, hoping for a deal, were able to link Damien directly to a wider network of fraud. They discovered he would romance women, convince them their partners were cheating or hiding assets, then help them secure their fair share, which he would then largely siphon off. Sarah, it appeared, was just his latest victim, accomplice. The Bali authorities, spurred by an Interpol notice triggered by Miller's team, detained Damien at his resort. He didn't resist. Sarah was with him, reportedly shocked and hysterical when she realized he was being arrested not for a visa issue, but for serious financial crimes. The legal fallout was immense. Damien Cross was extradited to the U.S. Faced with overwhelming evidence from multiple victims, including my security footage and the detailed financial trails, he was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Finch also faced charges. Sarah, her situation was more complicated. Izzy and I discussed it. She was complicit, at least in defrauding you and the business, Leo, Izzy said. But she was also clearly manipulated by Cross. We can press for maximum charges, or we can use her testimony against Cross for a more favorable global settlement for you. I thought of the early years, the shared dreams, even the recent betrayal. The woman who texted me from the airport was not entirely the woman I'd married. Part of her had been lost, or taken. I want what's mine back, I told Izzy. I want the business to survive. As for Sarah, I want her to understand the consequences, but I don't need to destroy her beyond what she's already done to herself. Sarah agreed to cooperate fully with the prosecutors against Damien in exchange for lesser charges related to the initial theft from our accounts. She returned what little money she personally had left. Most of it was gone, spent by Damien or tied up in his convoluted offshore network. Damien Cross was eventually sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Finch got 3. The process of recovering funds was slow, but with Damien's network partially dismantled, some assets were clawed back. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Our divorce was finalized quietly. No drama, just paperwork. She forfeited all claims to Leo's table and any remaining joint assets. I got an official apology, a hollow document that meant little. I sold our apartment. Too many ghosts. I moved into a smaller place above the restaurant. For a year, I poured everything into rebuilding Leo's table. We rebranded slightly, introduced a more accessible menu alongside the signature dishes. The old regulars came back, new ones discovered us. The Michelin star remained. Slowly, painstakingly, we recovered, but the city felt tainted. The restaurant, once my everything, now also held the shadow of betrayal. About 2 years after it all imploded, I made a decision. I promoted my loyal sus chef, Carlos, to head chef, made him a junior partner, and sold him a majority stake in Leo's table. He had earned it. I needed a new canvas. I bought a small, rundown vineyard with an old stone farmhouse in Northern California, a region known more for its rustic charm than its Michelin stars. It was a gamble, a completely new world. I learned about grapes, soil fermentation, a different kind of alchemy. I started a small farm-to-table restaurant there, just 20 seats, open 4 nights a week. The food was simpler, tied to the seasons, to what my own land produced. My days were filled with pruning vines, tending the garden, experimenting with new dishes, the Pacific breeze a constant companion. It was hard work, a different kind of hard, but it was mine. The rhythm was slower, more deliberate. My mise en place was now the earth itself. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from a woman in Chicago. She'd read about Damien Cross's conviction. My case had been cited as a precedent that helped unravel his larger scheme. Her mother had been one of his earlier victims, losing her life savings and her trust in people. Your courage to fight back, Mr. Maxwell, she wrote, and your lawyer's tenacity helped bring justice for my mother, even if it was late. You showed that these predators can be stopped. Thank you. I pinned the letter next to my spice rack. Sometimes, when the solitude of the vineyard felt too vast, I'd read it. My fight hadn't just been for myself. It had unintentionally helped others. That gave the whole painful saga a different kind of flavor, a hint of something redemptive. But the anger towards Sarah had long faded, replaced by a kind of wary understanding. She made her choices. I made mine. I heard she was working in retail back in her hometown, living a quiet life. I rarely thought about her. My focus was on the soil, the grapes, the next perfect pairing of food and wine. I found a quiet peace in the rhythm of the seasons, in the creation of something new from the ground up. Damien Cross was still in prison. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had been served. My life was no longer about chasing stars or accolades. It was about authenticity, about connection to the land, about crafting experiences that were real. The vineyard taught me patience, resilience. You can't rush a good wine, and you can't force healing. Both take time, care, and the right conditions. I learned that even the most devastating fire can clear the ground for new growth. And sometimes, the simplest ingredients handled with honesty make the most profound dish.